All right, so the subject of today's webinar is Spirit Guides and Allies, Part 2. And I want to have the opportunity to share a few things with you that I didn't get a chance to cover last time and that have occurred to me since the previous webinar last week. I also have a couple of questions from folks who are attending that I want to address first, just to kind of build a bridge between those two. And one of them that Huffin asked earlier that I thought was really fascinating, and I think it touches on an issue that is germane not just to the journey, but also in many aspects is relevant to everyday life. And the question was, let's say that you're in a journey, and in this journey you become the animal that you are journeying to or to be with. And in the course of that journey, the animal does some fairly horrific things, as animals may do. They may hunt and kill, and those sorts of activities can easily happen in the context of a journey. Now, her question was related to the idea of honoring and being grateful and saying, being respectful of the journey space. And how does that work whenever you don't have an opportunity to say, I'm sorry, or forgive me, or anything that you feel like you might need to do in order to come back into balance with the events of that journey? Okay. So there's a couple of ideas that I'd like to toss out there. One of them is that whenever that happens in your journey, the animal guide is taking over. And so you literally do not have the ability to make changes. You do not have the ability to affect in a real way what is actually happening. You are basically along for the experience. And that experience is what the guide is wanting you to see, to experience, to have that connection with you directly rather than as an observer. Okay. So that's the point of that kind of journey, so that you can experience the journey process through the eyes and the body of your animal guide. Now, it's possible, and it makes a lot of sense, that as a human, I might have an emotional response to what's happening. And that also is part of the lesson. Now, you can, in fact, express that dismay, or you can express your sense of being in gratitude, or that you are sorry for what is going on. But remember this, the term responsibility implies that you have the ability to respond. And when you don't have the ability to respond, when you can't respond, when you can't take care of what's going on, then you have limited, if any, responsibility for what's going on. Do you see? So in that case, the idea that you are disrespecting the journey environment is taken away. The animal that you are journeying with or as has basically taken over, and you no longer have the ability to respond. Now, when the journey is over, if you are released from the animal before you return, then you can always express your appreciation and your sadness, perhaps, about what you might have experienced, because that's a human emotion that you have, right? But even if not, if you leave the journey space without that opportunity, you can always spend just a little bit of time after the journey is over and do the same thing. Because you see, that bridge between non-ordinary reality, the spirit world, and ordinary reality is not severed. It's really not. It's just that it is now separated, and you are operating from a different context. Now, after the journey is over, you're operating out of the context of ordinary reality once again. And yes, you still can express your emotion. You can express your gratitude, and that still will be heard. That still will be heard. Okay. I'm hoping that answers your question sufficiently. But I also want to mention that that also applies in ordinary life as well, because in situations where you do not have the ability to respond, then you literally do not have responsibility, or not much. It doesn't mean that you might not later want to make amends. That's certainly possible. It's okay to do that, right? But some people feel very guilty about things that happen when they are not responsible, when they don't have the ability to do anything in the moment. Okay. So I commend that to you again. Okay, very good. And Leah asked a question about dreams. And I have to admit that I'm not a very strong dreamer. I do most of my work in journeys and in meditation, in long walks and things like that. I used to dream a lot when I was younger and used to work a lot in dream time. But for some reason, not so much these days. It could be that I'm too busy. However, the way that I've always dealt with dreams is very much as though they were a form of journey, meaning that I treat dreams the same way that I treat my journeys, and vice versa. I don't do dream interpretation in the way that some people do. I treat my dreams as though they were like journeys. And if I feel the need to understand or interpret them, to understand what the message is, then I treat them exactly the same. I use the same approach to the symbols as I would otherwise. In my history, I did work with a psychologist for a while, and she always had her way of interpreting dreams based on sort of a book of dreams that she had. I always felt that that was limited, if not inappropriate, because what spider may mean to you may very well be different to me, even in the context. So if I encounter a spider in my dreams in one situation, and you encounter a spider in your dreams in another situation, the two might actually not mean the same thing. So it always seemed to me to be limiting and somewhat misinformed to treat dreams as dream symbols in the same way for each one. Okay, so that's my best answer for that one. I hope that works. So for today, what I'd like to do is to focus on an aspect that actually began to come up at the end of the last journey. And I want to do a little bit of a bridge because, as I mentioned earlier, for me, the dream time and the ordinary reality time are not that different. They're actually like separate parts of the same experience. It's like the journey experience, or more clearly, non-ordinary living experience, is slightly altered. It's like it's tuned a little bit differently in terms of frequency. If you think about energetics, if you think about energy, the spirit world or non-ordinary reality is very much like ordinary reality, but the frequency has changed. And so when we journey, we move through the frequency shift so that we can experience the new frequency in a different way. Now, sometimes that frequency may be very different. It may be very different, or sometimes it might be very close. And I think of middle world journeys as being very close to the frequency of ordinary reality, which makes it so that I can rather easily journey to have a conversation with a house or a tree or a mountain or another person in the middle world. Now, Don Juan Matus, through Carlos Castaneda, talked about that shift of frequency might be so great that you are no longer human. And he talked about moving the assemblage point in that regard. Now, the moving of the assemblage point happens in a place between ordinary and non-ordinary reality. It's a place where the vibration of who you are can get shifted so substantially that you are no longer human. That's what he would say. I've never experienced that. I know that academically. I sense it because of the way that I see in terms of the frequencies of energy and the frequencies of how ordinary and non-ordinary reality work together. But I have never seen anyone shift from being a human to being an animal in real life. Okay, I've never seen that. Now, that being said, I do work with a woman who works with multiple personality disorders, and she tells me with great confidence that whenever some of her clients shift, they physically change. Their eyes may change, for example. Their face may change, for example. They may get larger or may get smaller in alignment with the new personality that emerges. Now, I trust her. I've known her a long time and I believe her, but I have never seen that happen. So that's all I can say about that kind of broad shift between ordinary and non-ordinary reality states. Okay. So now let's say that I'm correct and that ordinary and non-ordinary reality, or our reality into the spirit world, is not that separate, that there is a tether, if you will, or a connection or a bridge between us that we can traverse to get to the spirit world. Why would it not be that the spirits can come to our world as well? Why would it not be so? I believe that it is so. I believe that happens quite frequently, although we don't ordinarily experience that sort of thing. It may be a part of what we experience in the middle world, in our ordinary reality, when we encounter a being, a bird, a mountain lion, a cat, whatever kind of animal we might encounter. It might very well be that that shift happens because of the similarities between the two worlds. And that being literally crosses into this one. And we perceive them because of the way that they are tuned to our perception. Do you see? I'm hoping that makes some sense. It's kind of a deep subject. I find I have to wave my hands a lot in order to make it work. But I used to, when I was teaching public classes in shamanic journeying, one of the exercises that I would give my folks when we talked about power animals and totems and that sort of thing was the idea of take your guide to work day. In other words, when you go to work, imagine that your guide is going with you. Imagine that your guide sits next to you as you're working at your desk. Okay? Imagine that your guide wanders through the hallways while you're working to check out all the other humans and see what they're up to. Imagine what it would be like if your spirit guide could join you in your world and get to know you through your ordinary experience. Would that not be extraordinary? Now, I believe that it does and can happen because I've done it. I have invited Wolf to go with me on many occasions. In fact, whenever I go for a walk, I often invite Wolf to come along with me, and Falcon as well. Wolf walks by my side and Falcon soars above, and we go for a wonderful walk together. Okay. Now, I do believe that that does happen, and there's evidence for that. Let's look at this. In our deep history, whenever people, shamans, or even tribe folk wanted to have a mystical experience, they would find a dark place to go. They would go deep into caverns. They would go deep into dark, dense forests. They would find time on new moons when there was no light to go into these dark places. And that is where they would do their rituals. That is where they would do their connection to spirit. Why? Because when you do that, you take away your vision. And your vision is very distracting. Your vision is not only distracting, but it also interprets your experience, because we are such a visual culture. Humans have become very visual as opposed to auditory or smell. Okay, we rely very heavily on our eyes. And if we can take that away, then we shift our perception so that we can do some extraordinary things. Like we can perceive things in the cave, in the forest, that we would not ordinarily experience if we could see. And that, I believe, is why when we go into these caverns, we go into these caves and into these dark places, then there is an upwelling within us of something very sacred and special happening. It's like our boundaries begin to fade and we begin to connect increasingly with the surroundings that we have. Do you see? And so I know people, I have met these people and I worked with them who feel beings around them all the time, not just every once in a while. And some of these beings are benevolent, friendly, helpful. Some of them are not. The ones that are not are a little bit scary, okay? But the ones who are amazing, because when you can make that connection in ordinary reality to some being or energy that's there with you, then you have an opportunity to bridge from your ordinary way of being into another way of understanding what is going on in your environment and in your world. Okay? Now, I believe it was Teresa who posted the observation that when she was first learning how to do journeys and learning about spirit guides, that she had her guide was a Black Panther, as I recall, and she always had a sense that when she was driving, Black Panther was sitting in the passenger seat beside her. And she said, interestingly enough, that sometimes, perhaps often, I don't remember, she could perceive Black Panther through the corner of her eye. Now, through the corner of your eye is a very interesting place, because if you are in a dark place and if you try to focus on what's ahead of you, you are blind. But if you're in a dark place and you pay attention to what's going on around you in your peripheral vision, then you may experience some extraordinary energetics, perhaps beings that are on the peripheral, in your peripheral vision, on the perimeter of your perception. Now, that's kind of what perimeter walking or peripheral walking, I can't remember the name of it right now, is all about. It's going into a dark place and walking and paying attention to what's going on to the side of your eyes rather than what's directly in front of you. You see? So I believe that there are beings around us all the time. And I believe that under the right circumstances, we can perceive them. And I do believe that we can also work with them in the moment. For example, if Teresa was driving and Panther was sitting in the passenger seat and Panther did something surprising, Teresa would probably pay attention. And it could be that Panther is giving her a heads up as to what might be around the corner. Okay. So I believe that we can, in fact, work with our guides that way in ordinary reality as well as non-ordinary reality. It's a matter of perception. It's a matter of filtering. It's a matter of paying attention to what might show up that you wouldn't ordinarily experience. And it's also a matter of offering an invitation. Because if you invite your guides to come and join you, odds are pretty good that they will. If you don't invite them, it probably won't happen. So again, going back to how to work with spirit guides and allies, and part of being respectful is that you recognize that they too respect you. And so you need to be proactive. If you want them to do something, if you would like for them to help you, you have to ask. It's important to keep that in mind. They're not going to interfere. One of the traditions I studied early on in my practice insisted that when we are born, we come accompanied by at least three guides whose job it is to travel with us throughout our life and to be a help to us. The reason for that, so they said, is that living in this reality system, in this creative, multidimensional, time-oriented space is too complicated for any one being to actually handle. And so these energetics, these beings, whatever you choose to call them, come with you in order to help you to navigate and negotiate your life, at least in the beginning. Now, there are different names for these beings. Some call them allies, some call them angels. I took to calling them helpers because for me, that's what they did. They helped, right? But you can call these beings anything that you want in order to relate to them because they don't care. It doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters to them is that you get through this living experience to the best of your ability, that you learn as much as you can, and that you stay as safe as you can be. That's what helpers or angels or allies are here to do. And they would say that as you get older, as your world becomes more complex, or perhaps when you get a lot more responsibility and things become more intense for you in terms of managing what's going on around you, then more helpers will show up. And they will be there to help guide you as well. What's the purpose of that? Well, as stated, it's to help you to navigate and negotiate this living space. And like we were talking about with other spirit guides earlier, they don't interfere. They do what they can, but they don't interfere. And so if you ask, they will help you. Some of them specialize, for example, in communications. Some of them specialize in being able to see ahead of time in time. Some of them specialize in physical health. And so some of these allies help you in very specific ways. Now, if you think about the world in that way, what you can imagine or what you can see or understand is that the energetic world around you is much more rich and complex than we ordinarily think of it. And what we have done is we have, in the course of becoming more solid and physical, we've established a series of filters that helps to keep us from going stark raving mad, because there's so much complexity out there that it's overwhelming. Now, if we have a system in place where we can narrow our view to what is most important and let the rest of the energetics that are here to help us handle it, then we can navigate this life pretty well and we can thrive in it. If we feel that we're alone, on the other hand, if we feel that there's no help and no one there, then our being can get smaller and smaller and smaller as we are less and less able to take care of ourselves, less and less able to manage what is going on in our lives. Now, we can expand that easily simply by recognizing that we're not alone, that there are lots of beings that are here to help us. There are lots of beings. Some of them are in the spirit world as we are exploring in our journey. Some of them are in ordinary reality as we're beginning to understand how the two worlds are not so separate. And we can build that bridge between the two worlds in such a way that we can work with both at the same time. That is a shamanic way of living. Again, one of the definitions of shamanism is one who is a walker in both worlds. So as we work with our spirit guides, our animal guides, our angels, our helpers, then we can really carefully and well integrate our being with the rest of the world. And that's what we really need right now. As a culture, perhaps even as a species, what we need to do is to begin to develop a new way of being in the world. Joseph Campbell talks about the need for new myths, because the old myths that we are living by now were developed before the birth of Christ, actually. 500 to 1000 BC is when the myths that we are working with and we're telling stories from were developed. And his observation is that the myths that we need to work with and to create now are about the planet. It's about how humans and all beings interact with and are part of the planet as a whole. Anything less than that, he would say, is insufficient. So what he talks about is that there are no relevant active myths right now. And it could be, if he's right, or if he was right, that that is the root of a lot of the problems that we are seeing as humans in the past 100 years. The myths are insufficient. And so, in closing, I would like to invite you on a quest to find a way for yourself to integrate the energy of spirit into the energy of your everyday life. And there are many ways to do that. We've talked about some on the past two webinars. But that effort is worth it. If not for you, for all of the planet, for all the beings. And that, my friends, is a very shamanic world view.
Could you say a little bit more about that myth? Give me an example of a myth. I guess would Christ be a myth?
A myth has a lot to do with what Campbell says is that myths underline reality. And so myths like Oedipus, myths like the North American stories of the origin, myths like the stories told in the Bible and ancient religious texts are all the underpinnings for the way that we interact with the world. Okay, so those myths are what he has said are breaking down, that they're not relevant to an advanced society because things are moving too quickly. And so it takes time to develop myths. It can take hundreds of years to develop myths. But our society is moving so quickly that we don't have time to consolidate the stories into what are powerful and more meaningful mythical stories. So they're not about personal myths. They're about myths for the culture, myths for humans. You see? So there's many layers of myths. The book, The Power of Myth, I greatly recommend it to you. I'm in the middle of rereading it again, which is probably why I've launched into this thing about myths. But it is important, and it's an eye-opening exploration into how we are, who we are over time, and where we're going. Thank you for that question. It's a good one. Any other questions?
Maybe one from what you mentioned earlier, inviting guides in ordinary reality, like take your animal guide at work. Would you say that the guides also benefit from that? And if yes, how?
I'm not completely sure I heard your question correctly. There was a lot of interference, but as I understood it, the question was if we can invite the guides and they can initiate it as well, correct? So my thought about that is that it's better if we invite them, because remember, they're not going to be intrusive. They don't want to disrespect our space any more than they want their space to be disrespected. And so it's a better idea, in my personal opinion, that that we invite them. And I do believe that our guides do benefit from being in our ordinary reality in a number of ways. At the very least, they get to know us better. They get to see our context. And so our relationship can deepen because they know more about what it's like to be me or what it's like to be human in ordinary reality. I also believe that it's probably true that they learn more about humans in our direct engagement with us as opposed to just in journeys. So I believe it's a two-way street in terms of benefit. In fact, I sort of believe that you don't have any living experience that doesn't have some benefit for you. So there's that. I hope that helps.
Well, would guides, do they experience birth and death?
No, not really. The guides that we are working with they're not discrete lives as we think of them in our dimensional space. They exist in the spirit world, which is a non-dimensional space. You can go anywhere at any time, right? Now, there are some who say, and I do believe that it's probably true, that what we're dealing with our guides are actually archetypes. In other words, wolf is not multiple wolves. It's not a wolf or the wolf. It is wolf. And wolf is the same energy, the same being experienced by millions of people from different perspectives. Okay? Which is why I never say the wolf or a wolf, because for me, it's just wolf. And it's my encounter, my direct encounter with that particular archetype that infuses my experience. Now, archetypes don't die. They are not actually born. They are energetics that are eternal and they're always there. Wolf today is the same as wolf 1,000 years ago. All right. Now, sometimes when wolves or when our power animals do die in our journeys, it's not a real death. It's a message. So wolf doesn't die. He may pretend to die, but that's to teach you something. Okay, very good. Those are great questions, folks. I appreciate it very much. And I see that I'm running out of time now. So, and also a little bit running out of voice. But I hope that you could understand, and I hope that the information that I was able to share with you is at least interesting, if not helpful and enlightening. So we'll put something else together soon. And I do look forward to seeing you again. I will see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Gerry.